Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about the Pittsburgh mayoral race. But first, we're joined by Susan Snyder, reporter with the Philadelphia Inquirer. You wrote that Penn State's plan to close some branch campuses has received pushback. Why has the university decided to close some locations?
Yeah, I think they've been watching a steady decline in enrollment really over the last decade. In terms of 12 of the campuses that they're looking at closing, they've said there's been a 39% decline in enrollment over a 10-year period. And it comes at a time when a lot of universities are sort of stretched for some financial resources, trying to figure out what moves to make. And so Penn State's talking about trying to make some changes there, close some of the campuses. They haven't said how many. They're just looking at this, universe of 12 schools considering. And then they're saying they would want to invest some of the money into the other campuses, that they end up saving. But I think the money was there. I think they're losing $40 or $50 million a year running these. So that's basically the reasons.
What's the biggest criticism regarding the decision to potentially close some of the Commonwealth campuses?
Yeah, I think so. What we heard from a couple places, the Penn State chapter of the American Association of University Professors, and then also a couple of current trustees on the board and some former trustees. I think they're concerned that by doing this, you may be cutting some students in certain areas of the state out of the possibility of getting a Penn State education because it's more affordable for them to live at home and attend some of these campuses for 2 years. Some of them even go for their whole bachelor's degrees there. And also, in some of those campuses, they've really been able to diversify the student population. So there's concerns about how this would affect the Black student population, Latino student population. There are a lot of concerns about that too. So I think the question is these campuses have been around for quite a while, and students in some of these communities really rely on them. They're integral parts of those communities. And I think there's a concern about what will happen, if Penn State closes some of these.
Has there been any opportunity for a public comment before a decision is made?
I know that the president has said this is going to be her decision. That she was gonna. I'm sure people are probably giving some feedback, right? But I think at the end of the day, she was even saying, I know faculty were really upset about this because they really wanted input, and felt like at the end of the day, they weren't really, their voices weren't heard quite enough. So I think there is some concern about that.
What criteria is being used to determine which schools potentially close?
I think they're looking at, as far as I know, they're looking at a number of things. I can't cite everything, but I think the enrollment really, was a big factor. Some of the campuses that aren't being touched are like the bigger campuses, like in the Philadelphia area, Brandywine, Abington, Great Valley. None of those are under consideration. Barron, I know, is another one out in Western PA. I think that's not under consideration. Lehigh Valley. So I think they were really looking at the smaller campuses that have lost, quite a bit of the enrollment. I think they were looking at the role in the community, looking at the population, even in those communities, to see, what the future projections are, for available students. So I think those were some of the things. Yeah.
You had alluded to President Neely Bendapudi saying that this will be her decision. Should the Board of Trustees or some other larger governing body be involved in that decision as well?
Well, I think the Board of Trustees, what I should say is I think she was saying it was going to be her recommendation, right? And the board, I think, does have to vote then, but yeah, I think she was saying at the end of the day, she was gonna be the one who, made the decision in terms of, what she thinks should be, should be closed.
What role does state or federal money have in helping to fund these schools, and what is the outlook on that moving forward?
Well, Penn State is a state-related university, right? So, it does get quite a bit of money from Pennsylvania, from the Commonwealth. So, I suppose and I'm not aware of this, but I'm sure there probably are, legislators in different parts of the state who are some of these communities where some of these campuses might be targeted for closure. Where we could see, even more pushback on this, more concerns. Could that affect, Penn State's funding going forward? I suppose it could, depending upon how the legislators, feel about this. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what we know about a timeline right now? What will happen to students that may be currently attending one of the branch campuses that may be slated to close, for example?
Yeah, I think, and I think it was, I'm pretty sure, I think it's like, it's not for a couple years in advance, right? Like, I think it's 26, 27, I think it is. I think I had in my story. I can't remember exactly, but I think that's what it was. That they wouldn't close until, like, even if she announces it, they're not going to close until then. But initially, she was going to announce it before commencement, and then she announced, wait, we're going to wait until after commencement. My guess is it'll be the week after, or the week, a little later in May, when she actually announces that decision. And then the board, I guess, then would have to come together at some point and, deal with that. But I mean, it would, whenever this decision is final, then, it would be a couple years before students would have time, to figure out sort of what their next steps would be. Yeah.
Susan Snyder, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break.
The Pennsylvania Press Club gives key lawmakers and newsmakers a forum to discuss issues of the day with the club's members and guests. The featured speaker at the monthly luncheon answers questions that are collected from the audience and read aloud by the event's MC. The guests include governors past and present and other prominent figures from the world of politics and business. PA Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee Chair Jean Yaw, live Monday, April 28th at 12:30 p.m. on PCN.
Want to know what's new on your favorite PCN series? Looking to stay up to date with state leadership and government activities? Subscribe to PCN's newsletters and stay informed about everything Pennsylvania. Get exclusive previews, behind-the-scenes insights, and can't-miss recommendations delivered straight to your inbox. Choose the information that's important to you. It's free, it's easy, and it's just a click away. Sign up for your all-access pass to everything Pennsylvania. Visit PCNTV.com to sign up today.
Welcome back. Our guests today are Hallie Lauer, city government and politics reporter with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Charlie Wolfson, reporter with Public Source, and Gerry Shuster, professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Gerry, we'll start with you. Why has the Pittsburgh mayoral race sparked national attention?
I think primarily because it's a race between two Democrats, one who is primarily identified as a kind of a progressive, and the other that should be skilled in more, how shall we say, conservative kind of orientation. And I think that since the city of Pittsburgh is primarily Democratic, I think the nation is looking at the city to determine really how the Democrats will fare in this one, the Democrat hierarchy, I should say.
Hallie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think also too the campaigns have kind of made this a national issue. Mayor Gainey, the current incumbent, has been painting his opponent, Corey O'Connor, as someone who he claims is taking what he calls MAGA money. So Corey has taken donations from some Republicans. He's had meetings with some people who have worked in Republican spheres and have worked with Donald Trump's campaign when he was running. So that kind of like nationalization of the local politics has really brought a lot of eyes to Pittsburgh.
Charlie, your thoughts?
I would also say that it has a lot of significance because of the movement and the coalition that brought Gainey to power 4 years ago. That was not just something that started 4 years ago. It started back around 2017, and 2021 was really a landmark victory for those progressive groups. And it's going to be really significant whether or not they can withstand this really big test this year to see if they can stay in power.
For the benefit of our statewide audience, how would you all describe the political makeup and the political environment of Pittsburgh today, and has that changed in recent years?
Well, it's as was already mentioned, it's predominantly Democratic. I think Democratic registrants outnumber Republicans about 5-1. But you're seeing, I think, some shifts underneath that in recent years. Until that kind of 2017 time, I think it was more of a moderate Democratic area. And then in the last 5 or 10 years, you started seeing more progressivism gain some traction.
Gerry, your thoughts on the environment today?
Well, I think that at one time, Pittsburgh was characterized by the blue collar vote, much more so than it is today. And that blue collar vote was primarily union oriented. And now we see that the unions are becoming very heavily involved in the campaign, not just financially, but rather dealing with each of the two candidates. And, surprising note, you have an organization like the United Steelworkers have financially and openly backed the current mayor. And given the nature of that orientation, people were surprised, I think, at that. But Corey O'Connor has picked up a significant number of union-oriented, and I would characterize them as more left-leaning organizations than I anticipated he might. But I think that a lot of it goes back to the days of his father. But he is not running on his father's record. He's running on the record of Corey O'Connor.
Hallie, your thoughts, particularly how important or significant is the progressive movement in Pittsburgh today?
I mean, it's been huge in Pittsburgh, like Charlie was saying, since about 2017. That movement elected Sarah Innamorato to the county executive seat, Summer Lee to the as a U.S. representative. So it's a big movement, and it's a very vocal movement. You still have those people in Pittsburgh that are really holding on to like the traditional Democrat moderate viewpoints, but it'll be interesting to see what happens here. It'll really show like how far that movement, the progressive movement, has shifted in Pittsburgh.
And just to add one thing related to what Gerry said about Corey O'Connor's father, I absolutely agree. Corey O'Connor is not running on his father's record. He really doesn't mention him on the campaign trail. His father, of course, was mayor of Pittsburgh in 2006. But I think some voters may still think of his father fondly, and it may still have an impact on some voters, even if Corey is not trying to have that happen.
Let's talk a little bit about the candidates. First of all, incumbent Mayor Ed Gainey was elected in 2021. What stands out about his first term?
I can start with that one. I think he came in 2021. Pittsburgh was in the middle of a pretty big upheaval in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. There were significant protests like there were across the city. A lot of people were unhappy with how the former mayor had dealt with that. And so Mayor Gainey came in and was promising to, make community policing a priority, to increase affordable housing. And the affordable housing component has been a huge part of his current campaign. And I think people are really, really pleased with those two things, with the way that he's handled policing and the way that he's handled affordable housing. There has been some criticism of his policing. We've been through a number of police chiefs right now. We're currently there's an interim police chief. We're searching for another one. But I think in terms of like community police relations, people are really pleased with that.
Anyone else want to comment? Yep, please, Charlie.
Yeah, the police union certainly is not happy with him. They are below their staffing targets, and the union leadership is unhappy with how he is approaching staffing the department. I would also say he's taken some heat for some things that are affecting really all cities in this post-pandemic era. Homelessness has been an issue, particularly in the downtown area, and just the perception of safety downtown. And again, these are things that have been tricky for really all cities in the last few years, and it's a little difficult to sort out how much can really be blamed on the mayor and how much is just something that is was kind of inevitable in the last few years.
I think what goes along with the office, though, Charlie, is the fact that that he is the mayor and he is the head of the police department, like it or not, and some of the percentages of lack of safety, the apparent perception of lack of safety in the downtown area, especially in the late evening, is I think having an impact on how people react to him and how interactive he is as to what's really going on in the city, especially in the downtown area. And I think that has become a major issue in the campaign. And it's almost every place that the two are together, in a debate format or with the organizations, that question is asked. What are you going to do to improve the safety of downtown? And that it's more than just the perception of the lack of safety. When you see the news in the evening and read the papers in the morning, you see that has occurred, the shootings, and now they're going to the extent, and I think I've said this before, where they're using bear mace as a new trick to try to denigrate, people in the downtown area walking from diners, dining establishments to, let's say, entertainment areas.
Which we know about Democratic challenger Corey O'Connor.
Pardon?
What should we know about Democratic challenger Corey O'Connor?
I think that he'll do what he says he'll do. I think he's very straightforward. He's very articulate, and he doesn't take a back seat. I like the way he approaches one particular asset of the campaign, and that is that he would deal with the nonprofits of Oakland much more differently than does the current mayor. I think he hammers hard at the mayor's lack of credibility with regard to, let's say, AHN or UPMC and the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon in particular, where he has not generated any real funding from them because he said that they had a kind of an agreement, and all four of them have indicated that was clearly not the case. And Corey O'Connor is attacking that approach very hard and saying that he has a different method, and he expressed a number of different ways that he intends to approach that particular situation. That's a big issue because it can reduce a potential major tax increase were he to get significant donations or endowments from those universities and nonprofits.
Let's talk a little bit about these two candidates' experience besides being incumbent mayor. Mayor Gainey had previously served in the state legislature. Corey O'Connor served as city controller and on city council. Does having that type of public record serve as a liability or as a benefit in the candidacy?
I think it really depends on who you ask. There are people who are really, really in O'Connor's camp because of his record on city council for passing the Paid Sick Leave Act, for trying to enact stricter gun control after the synagogue shooting. But on the opposite side of that, you have people who are maybe in a more moderate camp of Democrats in Pittsburgh who really didn't like the stricter gun control efforts. They ultimately were struck down by the courts, so that it cost the city a lot of money in legal fees. And so people are looking at that record for O'Connor as maybe a point of criticism. For the mayor, he has 4 years in office that are fresh in people's minds. So things like the policing situation are, some people are really happy with the community police relations. Some people, like the FOP, are really unhappy with being understaffed. I think it really just depends who you ask whether or not it's a liability.
I want to look at the Republican ticket as well. Now, as we're talking about the political makeup, you've all mentioned that is primarily a Democratic city. The last Republican mayor of Pittsburgh was John Herron, who served from 1933 to 34. Can a Republican win this race?
I'll never say never, but it is an extremely steep climb. A very high amount of Democrats would have to vote for the person. It's hard to see it happening.
Something most unusual would have to occur in the Democratic campaign to offset the power and the majority orientation of the Democrats with regard to the Republican candidates. First of all, I don't think they're as nearly as well known as either of the two Democrats are. But and in addition to that, just the name recognition itself carries a lot of weight in the city. It is a city of neighborhoods, and that accounts for a significant number of votes in and of itself.
Let's talk just briefly about these two candidates. First of all, on the Republican ticket, Tony Moreno. He's a former Pittsburgh police officer, and he also ran for mayor in 2021. Does that past run perhaps help him in the name recognition department?
I think it'll help him in the Republican primary. People may remember he had obviously an unsuccessful campaign 4 years ago, but it was kind of known for putting a lot of signs up around the city. There were Moreno signs everywhere. People kind of knew his name, especially compared to the other Republican candidate. But in the general election, I don't think that really will move the needle all that much.
The other Republican candidate is Thomas West. He's a small business owner. What are the main things that stand out about his candidacy?
The fact that it's not, oh, I'm sorry, Hallie.
That's okay. I think we were about to say the same thing. He is a political newcomer. He has never ran in for any office space before. He's never really been involved in politics. And he's really trying to paint himself as like the fresh face that he thinks that people might want.
He's the who of the campaign. Who?
Let's talk about some of the issues. One of the significant issues that's been repeated throughout the race is housing. Why has the city had a difficult time keeping up with its housing needs?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that.
Why has the city had a difficult time keeping up with its housing needs?
I think a lot of it has been the lack of focus on that particular aspect of the city's growth. And I think that both candidates now are indicating that they do have a plan. The current incumbent says that he's already involved in it, and almost every place that he goes, his focus, public relations wise, is on here we are with another opportunity for public housing and for housing for those who need it most. But then the critics come back with what he's done with the homeless group, and he's pushing them further away from the center of the city, but making it far more difficult for them to interact with the very services that they need. So, this is one of those things that you go up and down, and depending on what day of the week it is and who you're talking to, as to which of the two candidates can do the best and achieve the most with regard to this issue.
This has kind of emerged as the top issue between these two candidates, Gainey and O'Connor. Gainey's policy, his proposal, it hasn't been enacted yet, is to have a citywide mandate. If you're building an apartment building of like 10 or more units, some percentage of them have to be affordably priced. His theory is that if you just leave it to the market, if you just leave it to the developers, affordable units will not be created. O'Connor, and even more so, a lot of the people backing O'Connor disagree with that heavily. O'Connor says we can have mandates in some places, but not citywide. And notably, he's received a lot of donations from those developers who would be facilitating the building of these new housing complexes. So it's really two different theories of how to create housing in this election.
That has also resulted in a major issue between the two candidates too. The formula is that each of them choose to achieve the end goal for this, especially the money coming from the developers into the O'Connor campaign.
I think the affordable housing thing is such a unique peek into the campaigns, because base level, these candidates are like very similar. And then you get into the minutia and the details of like, okay, how exactly do they want to, build affordable housing? And it's just like small little differences here and there that the voters have to parse through.
Mayor Gainey launched an affordable housing map that touts 1,600 units. However, his critics have noted that only about 500 of those are currently completed. What will stick with the voters more, the specific details about how many housing units, or the bickering over this issue, or whether the mayor has been clear on what he's actually achieved? What stands out on that?
I think voters are most concerned with how much they're paying for their housing. Some people, of course, are tuned into the latter. They're tuned into, candidates. Are they being honest? What are they saying? But I think a lot of people just want to see, is there new construction being built? Is my housing too expensive, et cetera? And voters will be the judge of that, no matter what the numbers actually are.
In all fairness and in being candid, it's still coming down to a matter of personalities, how each of the two candidates deals with the major issues, not the least of which is what you just identified, Charlie. And, wherever the two candidates meet a group of people and they start the open discussion about those particular areas of the campaign, they seldom get challenged by the people. Of course, they're pretty particular about how they put the crowd together too, which kind of offsets the potential for high-level criticism openly and in front of a camera or a reporter's pen.
Let's move on and talk a little bit more about the issue of crime. Mayor Ed Gainey had said that in 2024, there were 0 homicides for people between the ages of 13 and 17. Is that an indication that the mayor's community policing initiatives are successful, or is there a bigger picture there that he's not talking about?
Well, I think that's been a trend nationwide. You saw some higher crime numbers right after the peak of the pandemic, and it has come down in the last couple of years, Pittsburgh being no exception. However, what I think it has done is kind of taken that away as a potent issue for Gainey's opponents. Public safety, of course, it's an issue, but it's not the top issue in this race as it was 4 years ago. It's hard for me to say if that's to Gainey's credit that it's come down, but it has made it so it's kind of hard to attack him over it.
But O'Connor's still making it an issue. And I think his people are fluid enough within the downtown area to have them become much more vocal and continue the discussion on the lack of safety, because they just don't see the people walking through the community. On the other hand, Gainey has started 2 programs, both of which will be in effect, hopefully, by the NFL draft next year. One of them is the dock area, and that particular where the spring festival will now take place, and then over in Market Square. Those 2 areas, as they improve, will dramatically enhance the ability of people to return to downtown, presuming that they're going to be safe and closely monitored by the legal staff or the police staff.
Now, Hallie, a little earlier in the program, you referenced the chief of police position and how that's been in flux. For those that have not followed this race or this position, can you talk a little bit about what's happened with that role during this administration?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Gainey took office in 2022, the police chief, his name was Scott Schubert at the time, he left and took a job with the FBI, which isn't uncommon. When new administrations come in, you see a lot of leadership turnover and change. And so right after that, the mayor and his administration launched a nationwide search for a new police chief. And that took almost a year, close to like 14 or 15 months, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, before he was officially sworn in and on the job. He was a previous police officer in Pittsburgh. His name's Larry Scarrato. And then he had transitioned to Fort Lauderdale and was the police chief there before he came back to Pittsburgh. He was on the job about a year and a half. And then there was a bit of a controversy that came out. He was refereeing basketball games, Big Ten basketball games, which, depending on who you ask, he was permitted to do by the mayor on his off time. Depending on who you ask, that was something that he just chose to do. So after that came out that he was returning to referee these games, he left the bureau. And the acting chief, Chris Ragland, was put into place. Earlier this year, Chief Ragland was nominated to be the full-time police chief. And what had happened was a couple of groups in the city of Pittsburgh, community organizations, wanted to sit down with him and talk to him prior to his appointment. And his appointment is subject of city council approval. So city council was trying to schedule up to 6 community-led interviews with the police chief. And the situation became politicized, according to Chief Ragland. He said that a couple of the city council members were trying to influence who he appointed to the command staff. And so he left. And so now there is a different interim chief. And right now we're kind of all in this, I don't want to say limbo, but we're not really sure where it's going. The administration has kind of indicated that they don't plan to do another nationwide search, but there hasn't been any clear updates right now on what's going to happen next.
The candidates have also talked about understaffing both with the police force as well as with emergency services. Why have all these services been difficult? Why has staffing been a problem with emergency personnel?
I don't think staffing is the lack of adequate staffing for the city of Pittsburgh is peculiar just to our city. I mean, small boroughs and municipalities across the state and major cities across the nation are all having the same kind of issues. One, it's not even so much the cost, but the fact that the positions that they hold are so difficult. I'm referring primarily to the police departments. But we still have issues with emergency medical services. A lot of that comes as a result of the problems that are associated with that comes as a result of lack of funding directly, not only with rolling equipment, but with the equipment that each of those departments use, fire department and EMTs. So, they have their separate problems, but money's still a major problem.
Two other things about the police situation. One, the former mayor, Bill Peduto, had a hiring freeze around the time of the pandemic, around the time of the George Floyd related protests. And we're still feeling the after effects of that. You interrupt hiring for 1 year, it's going to be felt for a long time. And also the police union leadership tells us that suburban departments and the county police will pay more than the city police. So officers who are not at retirement age are leaving the city bureau to go make more money elsewhere.
I think too, it's just,
go ahead, Hallie.
sorry.
I'm sorry, please.
No, it's also just part of like a nationwide issue, specifically with police. You're seeing less and less people wanting to go into that career path, and it's something that's impacting Pittsburgh as well.
Let's give our guests a brief break while we look at what's coming up on PCN. Senator Jean Yaw will be the guest at the Pennsylvania Press Club luncheon today. The senator has a proposal for taxing skills games that could generate a new source of revenue for Pennsylvania. That's today live at 12:30. Voices of Veterans continues on PCN. Jeff Ulanich from Washington, Pennsylvania, talks about being a medic in the Vietnam War. That airs tonight at 8 o'clock. Tomorrow on the PCN Capitol Preview, we'll look at the impact of the state budget on labor. Our guests will be the president of the Pennsylvania State Building and Construction Trades Council, Rob Baer, and the president of SEIU Local 668, Steve Cantonese. They'll be here tomorrow morning live at 9 a.m. In the 1800s, the men who worked in Pennsylvania's lumber camps led dangerous lives keeping up with the demand for wood as a building material. Jennifer Haynes from the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum explains on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Pennsylvania has a primary election in May, and PCN has candidates for you to meet on Wednesday. The first race we'll look at is the mayor of Harrisburg. We have 3 Democrats for you. First, Dan Miller at 7 p.m., Tone Cook at 7:30, and Louis Butts at 8 p.m. And then on the issues moves west to the Pittsburgh mayoral contest. Corey O'Connor is a Democrat running in that primary. He'll tell us about his campaign Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free online. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. And now we return to our discussion about the Pittsburgh mayoral race. I want to talk a little bit about the issue of immigration. There's been significant change in immigration policy on the federal level since the Trump administration had taken over in January. Have the candidates talked at all about whether or not they would work with the federal government, particularly regarding cooperation on efforts to deport undocumented immigrants?
They both pretty much said no to that question shortly after Donald Trump was inaugurated in January. I don't know of any big confrontations where they had to really act on that since then, but they're pretty much in alignment on that point.
Well, there is some discussion on, and it's starting to just come probably at a good time because most of them are leaving campus. But international students have become very concerned on the campuses in Oakland. And, they, as are their parents. And I think but I haven't heard anything that is directly associated with either of the two campaigns in terms of how they are handling the potential crisis that might evolve. But I know that the universities are probably talking directly with both of them just to determine how they might handle, the surprise visits of ICE and other DEA on campus.
Hallie, a little earlier in the program, you had to talk a little bit about the view that some of Corey O'Connor's money came from MAGA entities. The Nation reported Corey O'Connor, quote, has received significant financial support from Trump allies and prominent Republicans, end quote. Does potential, at least the perspective that a candidate is being aligned with the Trump administration affect this race at all?
I think it does, yeah, especially, people in Pittsburgh see Donald Trump almost every day signing executive orders that they disagree with. So any relation to that, I think, could be harmful to the O'Connor campaign. He has been trying to push back. There are a number of donors that donated to his campaign currently and donated to Gainey back in 2021. So he's trying to push back on that and make that distinction there. But I think for some people, even just saying MAGA and O'Connor in the same sentence, the damage is done.
I'd like to make this broader. Does public sentiment of Donald Trump and his policies affect this race?
Ed Gainey is certainly hoping so. It would probably be a different race if Donald Trump were not the president right now. And I think it's not that easy of a sell to say Corey O'Connor is a Republican for people who are familiar with Pittsburgh politics. I think a lot of Republican voters in the city who know that actual Republican candidates don't have a great chance. They may have been hopeful for O'Connor to unseat Gainey, but I think as a lot of them I've heard from, as they've learned more about O'Connor, they're more disappointed. They said, "Oh, I thought he would be more conservative," but he's actually pretty much a liberal Democrat, just not the same as Ed Gainey. So for some people, maybe it's landing. They're concerned that O'Connor has ties to MAGA, as Gainey has said, but for a lot of people, I just don't think it's making that connection.
I concur with Charlie on that score. I think that if that were true, there would be a lot more made of it than there really is, and they would be identifying specifics. Have some of the organizations contributed to both the presidential campaign and perhaps to Corey O'Connor? I would say yes, but there are organizations that would typically do that under any circumstances, more for because of the business that they do and who they do business with, than anything else, rather than support. I don't think anybody would be an out and out vocal supporter of an organization characterized by MAGA. I think perhaps, do I support the president of the United States and his campaign? Perhaps the direction there is, but there's a huge difference in the crossover between, people may say that that's not exactly true, but supporting the president and supporting an organization like MAGA, though they have great wealth, are two different ball games, I think.
Gerry, you teach political communication. Can you just briefly compare the communication style of the candidates, and perhaps does anything stand out as being particularly engaging to the Pittsburgh electorate?
I think the way I'd like to characterize this is, and I've said this, actually some students have picked up on it too, is the fact that Ed Gainey has become much more alert and much more overt in his public initiation of his plans for the future. Up till this point, you haven't heard a great deal about him. You saw him visiting certain neighborhoods, but they were almost always the same neighborhoods that he visited. But once Corey O'Connor announced, he seemed to light a fire under Ed Gainey, and Ed Gainey then was seen everywhere, not exactly expressing things that people wanted to hear, but at the same time, he was becoming far more visible and far more apparent as a legitimate candidate for retention as mayor.
I would say that there's been kind of two phases to Gainey's reelection campaign. One, earlier this year, he was really talking about Trump and MAGA, and I'm defending the city from Trump. But I think the really stronger part of his campaign has been more recent weeks. He's been really defending his record on affordable housing and really making the case for what he's done as mayor, not talking about Trump. I don't know if it moved any votes, but to me, it's been the stronger part of his campaign.
In an era where social media is a regular staple at this point, do in-person appearances still matter? Is it still important for the candidates to meet the electorate and to communicate with the media?
I would say absolutely, especially in a city like Pittsburgh. You have a lot of people of an older generation that they want to see the candidates out in their neighborhoods and walking around. I talked to voters last week, and one of them was like, I see campaign signs for some of the candidates, but I don't see them anywhere. And that it really drives home for a lot of people. Like, oh yeah, I saw O'Connor in my neighborhood last week. Like I think it's like a Pittsburgh thing. Like Pittsburgh loves to vote for people who are from here. That's always a big part of people's campaigns. Like, oh, I'm born and raised in this city. So being really, really visible to people, I think, is a huge boost for any candidate.
Particularly for our two journalists, could you talk a little bit about the candidate's relationship with the media and the importance of that?
Well, I would say the first 3 years of Gainey's term, I think the media would have liked a little bit more access, and I know that's easy for me to say, but he wasn't always available for interviews. The mayor's office wasn't the most transparent or open. Not that any past mayor was, the picture of transparency, but it has got improved as the campaign has gone along, which obviously serves the mayor's purposes. And O'Connor, you can't really compare it because on city council, I mean, it's a totally different ballgame. You're not a manager of 3,000 employees. But O'Connor projects this kind of nice guy personality, going to cooperate with anyone, including the press, I would say. And that's also a means to serve his political ends.
Does anything surprise you about who's endorsing the candidates?
It surprises me that there has been a lack of endorsements. You could start with the governor of Pennsylvania. I know he has his own issues to deal with, but at the same time, his name is seldom mentioned by either of the two candidates, except as the candidates are dealing with a particular issue that the governor is proposing. For example, Gainey just mentioned a $600 million campaign that the governor is approaching with regard to improving inner city programs and so on across the state. Beyond that, you haven't really seen a list of big names that support either of the two candidates. And that is kind of strange. I think it's almost like there is a fear to jump on board one or the other of the campaigns because there might be a penalty paid at the end of the campaign.
I totally agree with that last thing you said, especially for people other than the governor, whose endorsement may not move the race that much. But the governor, his stature is such that if he were to endorse, that could actually really help one candidate or the other. So that's a little more interesting that he stayed out of it.
Is there any evidence? I'm sorry, Hallie, please go ahead.
It's interesting to look at the makeup of city council too. So there's 9 members there, and O'Connor has the majority of endorsements from city council, which in my memory, I don't know that the challenger has ever had the majority. In 2021, Gainey as the challenger got only one of the city council endorsements. So that's been interesting to watch there.
Is there any evidence that the governor may have gotten involved in the primary behind the scenes, perhaps fundraising or otherwise?
I've not noticed any, and I think that Hallie might be more in tune with that. But no one said anything that he has been in the city interacting with more of the campaign staff or associates of the current mayor or of O'Connor. And I think Charlie's right on target. The governor of Pennsylvania is an extremely popular governor, strangely enough, given the fact that Pennsylvania is no longer characterized as a blue state, more of a purple state. But at the same time, the mere fact that the popularity of the governor is such, the fact that he hasn't endorsed either of the two campaigns says a great deal for the governor's perception about the impact that it might have on him and his campaign. Because I think most people feel that if anybody is a legitimate candidate for presidency out of Pennsylvania in future campaigns, he is likely to be the name to come forward.
How important of a role has fundraising played in this race?
Well, after we see who wins the primary, I'll tell you how important it was. But O'Connor has raised a lot more money than Gainey so far, which is really uncommon for a challenger. But you look at who is donating to O'Connor, it's the building trades unions who throw around a ton of money every year. It's a lot of the developers I mentioned who, of course, have very deep pockets. So when you think about who supports O'Connor, it's not shocking that he's been able to raise a lot of money. And we'll see how it plays out in the last month here.
Before we run out of time, I want to talk just briefly about the economy of Pittsburgh, and in particular, has the city recovered from the coronavirus pandemic of the last 4 or 5 years?
It's seeming to be on the rebound. There's the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership actually just had their first quarter report last week, and they're saying that, downtown residency is back to where it was pre-pandemic levels. You have people coming in for big festivals, for parades. The job market has rebounded pretty significantly in Pittsburgh. So I think it's back on the upswing.
The Gainey administration had predicted lean years ahead. What are the candidates proposing to move the city forward financially?
They're both really hitting on that idea of getting more money from the major nonprofits. Gainey, of course, he said that 4 years ago, hasn't really done it so far. That's a pretty tough spot on his record. O'Connor, he's articulated somewhat of a plan, but I got to tell you, it sounds pretty similar to what most mayoral candidates the last however many years have said. I'll be eager to see if he can bring something to the table that works out differently if he's mayor.
I think if he's done anything or said anything that is dramatically different than that of Gainey's, he's not going to put the pressure, public pressure, on the nonprofits as much as Gainey's group has. And I think it's important to understand that that's critical, because right now some of the nonprofits, particularly UPMC and AHN, I think probably are a bit embarrassed because they seem not to be contributing to the growth of the city whenever their base is really non-taxable, and they have such a large base in the city. The universities, that's a different story, because their money comes from endowments and so on, and from tuition. So they can't. The way they play with their money and the way they fund different programs is much more available to public scrutiny than the private institutions.
Is there a clear front runner in this race?
I would say.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Charlie.
I was just going to say no, simply.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell right now. Depending on whose internal polling you're looking at, some of them have Gainey up, some of them have O'Connor up. Talking to people out on the street, there's a lot of people undecided. So it's going to be close, I think.
I think one of the ways we can look at this, though, is there a fear on the part of either of the two candidates? And you start looking at their new ads coming out, and they've become so negative and so threatening to the opponent in terms of what the perception is the opponent is doing, that it suggests that the supporter of that particular ad must have some concerns that there are inroads being made with regard to the other candidate's approach. Because they're heavy duty. The negativity of those ads at this point in time are surprisingly, it's almost as bad as the presidential campaign.
One last quick question. Does the outcome of this race have broader implications on how the future of the Democratic Party in Pittsburgh is viewed?
There will definitely be people who say that this is the beginning of the end for the progressive movement. I don't think I would, if Gainey loses, I mean, I wouldn't probably go that far yet, but it would be definitely a setback for them.
Definitely. I think one of the questions that was raised relatively recently is the fact that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot coming out of the Innamorato office. She's extremely quiet on this campaign, and some people are interpreting that as a fear to some limited extent that the focus and her philosophy may not be going over as well and as effectively as they anticipated. And so as a result, she's just, you can't make a mistake if you don't talk.
Hallie, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, Sarah Innamorato has endorsed Ed Gainey, but she has been pretty quiet about it. It was kind of like a Gainey made it known, and then it hasn't been mentioned again. So I think we're in for a really interesting last couple of weeks here in Pittsburgh to really see who comes out on top.
Our guests have been Hallie Lauer with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Charlie Wolfson with Public Source, and Gerry Shuster with the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Earlier, PCN spoke with Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill about her legislation involving government fraud and waste.
Welcome to our program. You've recently proposed legislation known as the Commonwealth Fraud Prevention Act. What would this legislation do?
This legislation would help Pennsylvania take back dollars that have been lost through fraud. And I think you look at the very challenging fiscal environment that Pennsylvania is in, this would be a tool for government to take back those dollars that have been wasted through fraud.
What are some examples of fraud in the government that wastes money?
So there are a myriad of stories that we can tell you. Think back to COVID and contact tracing. And there was a contact tracing app. And you could provide very personal information through that app. That app was actually secure. What wasn't secure was when that information off the app was transferred to a company called Insight Global to process. They put people's personally identifiable health information into an online, fully accessible Google spreadsheet. And when that occurred, can you imagine? I mean, it was things like sexual preferences, even of our children, very private personal information. When that happened, we went to court, and the Commonwealth got back money as a result of the mismanagement of personal health information by this entity. Had we had a False Claims Act or the Commonwealth Fraud Prevention Act in place, we would have been able to get more money back in that settlement. There are many other states that have similar statutes in place, and recently there was a settlement in a fraud case. Pennsylvania got back less money than New York because New York had this type of law in its books and Pennsylvania did not.
How can somebody report something that they might seem to be fraudulent in the government?
Right. So, this has been pretty challenging because, for example, in the case of Insight Global, we found out through a newspaper reporter. And there were people who had some challenges with their employment because there weren't adequate protections in place for those workers who brought forward these very serious claims. And so this legislation will provide more protections for those individuals who are brave enough to come out and report this type of waste and fraud and abuse. Right now, we encourage people to go to their higher ups, and sometimes that can be a little challenging. But this legislation would put in place a clearer path as well as protections for those individuals who bring this to light.
Senator Lindsey Williams co-sponsored this bill with you. How did she get involved?
This is something that she had worked on previously before she was in the legislature, and she reached out knowing that I had been an advocate for this as well. I will tell you that Republicans and Democrats may disagree with what we're going to do with that money when we reclaim it back to the Commonwealth's coffers. But I think we've been able to find common ground in saying that, no one wants to waste hardworking taxpayers' dollars. And so we've been able to partner on this issue. And I certainly think that when you can find those moments where you can find that common ground, you should take it and you should run with it.
How much other support have you heard from your fellow colleagues in the Senate?
Yeah, we have a fair number of co-sponsors. I haven't checked recently, but it has generated interest on both sides of the aisle. I think especially now, you look at our current fiscal position. Governor has asked for over 7.5% increase in spending in our state budget. Really challenging because revenues are not keeping pace with that kind of spending. Proposed 2 new taxes that don't even exist, one on gaming and one on recreational marijuana, that may have some hurdles in the General Assembly. So I think we have to play defense on our dollars, but we also have to go on the offense to bring those dollars back to the Commonwealth that have gone out in ways that they shouldn't.
Lastly, where is this bill in the legislative process currently?
Well, currently it's in committee, and we are hopeful that we will be able to move it out of committee to a full vote in the Senate, send it over to the House, and then hopefully onto the governor's desk. Again, no one wants to waste taxpayer dollars.
Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow to discuss the state budget and labor unions. The president of the Pennsylvania State Building and Construction Trades Council, Rob Baer, and the president of SEIU Local 668, Steve Cantonese, join us tomorrow live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.